my pleasure today to introduce Michael Ketover. He was brought to us by Dick Pyle, our program chair. And one thing we have in common is the Peace Corps. Michael served in Honduras and then as country director more recently in Ukraine. So he has some 30 years of collaborative experience in almost 40 developing nations and the USA. He spent the last 4 years, as I mentioned, as country director for the Peace Corps in Kyiv, Ukraine, where he managed the largest Peace Corps post globally before the pandemic, okay, where there were over 400 volunteers who served per year with 100 Ukrainian staff. Before his appointment in the Peace Corps, he served as a independent consultant at USAID and other capacities. And I see that besides being in Honduras, you were also in Guyana and the Dominican Republic, where I've worked and served with AmeriCorps. Anyway, you could be a good Rotarian. You have a spirit of service. And I always say the best thing I ever did, David Klaus, was join the Peace Corps, and the second best was become a Rotarian. And your wife, I understand, is in the Foreign Service and is presently posted in Myanmar. Okay, so nice to have you here. I will turn the mic, without further ado, I turn the microphone over to you. Okay, we have till 1:30.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mr. Pyle. Thank you, Dick, for inviting me. I'll be respectful of time. First of all, Shchiro witayamo was, Natalia, Igor, Dmitry. Ja hovoru trošky ukrajinského moviu. Vy ste boli Ukrajine. Thank you. I just got back from Ukraine. I was there for 4 years as the Peace Corps country director. And as Bill said, and thank you for the introduction, Bill, it was the largest Peace Corps post globally. I'm going to briefly talk about Peace Corps because I think it gives context to the response after the war. And I'm not going to get into the details of the war. We're all following the news or not, and engaging and supporting as we can. But Peace Corps' mission, and it's a federal agency, so I sat on a country team at the embassy with the ambassador and the deputy chief of mission and all the military and the political and economic and security, et cetera, officers. So I got to watch the last 4 years unfold, which included the impeachment trials and that business back several years ago now. I raise that because Peace Corps, funded by US citizens' tax money, focuses on world peace and friendship through service. Świadkujemy świadkujemy mir I świadkujemy służbę. Służba is service, so it's service oriented, just like Rotary. And I would be remiss not to thank Rotary for all of your support. Certainly during the war with the emergency fund that Rotary set up. I've spoken to several Rotarians and Rotary groups in Florida and in the MBA area, and there's a lot of interest and a lot of generosity as always for these causes. So thank you all for your generosity. So the mission is world peace and friendship through service, and the goals are about helping the Ukrainian ministries who ask for our assistance. So we worked with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Youth and Sports, and the Ministry of, I think it's called now, Territorial and Regional Development. And why was it the largest program in the world? Not for the poverty, not for the literacy. My staff was much more talented than I was. And once I figured that out, day one, it made my job as a manager much more easy. But I think it's because of the relationships, which is the second goal of Peace Corps. There's so many Americans now who can speak Ukrainian, speak Russian, those who served more towards the east or the south. And now with this emergency crisis, folks are stepping up in an amazing way. And I'll talk a little bit about what returned Peace Corps volunteers from Ukraine have been doing over the past, I guess we're approaching 70 days of war. Just stepping back, I had 60 full-time staff and 40 staff that we hired for our one pre-service training event cross-cultural and language facilitators, people to help us with the technical aspects of the training. And I'm on the phone or emailing or texting many people. Today, I was talking to some women. Almost everyone is displaced from where they were originally living. Some people are starting to move back, but as you saw, there were missiles in Lviv yesterday and in Kyiv last week. Yes, right. And it's real. And the sirens are incessant. Most Ukrainian men, as you probably have heard, from 18 to 60 were not permitted to leave unless there were certain exceptions for different categories. So most of our families are split. The mom and the kids and are either somewhere else in Ukraine or in other countries. So they are officially refugees. And I think there's 6 million internally displaced people and maybe 5 million refugees, and 2/3 of the children in Ukraine are not where they were before the war. And that disruption is just intense. And it's, you know, we don't want to over dramatize, but this is, well, I'm not going to over dramatize. It's what it is. So we at Peace Corps, focusing on peace and friendship, inculcate in our volunteers, and I would say young volunteers, but in Ukraine, which had excellent medical facilities before and will again before the war, we could accommodate senior volunteers. So about a quarter of our large group was over 40, 50, 60, and we had a handful of people celebrate some of their birthdays in their 70s serving in Ukraine. So this group is connected with their friends. They live with host families, so they call people family members, their work colleagues. And right when the war started, they started to mobilize to raise funds. And there's a return volunteer group from Ukraine, and they've raised over $150,000 for first aid kits. Because as you often probably have heard, non-soldiers are being trained for 2 weeks to form community brigades, and they don't have the equipment. So some of these groups were finding first aid kits, we're being asked to fund tourniquets, we're being asked to fund drones, vehicles, flak jackets, and through donations. And Peace Corps volunteers by nature are not necessarily of the means to do this, but the networks and the social media has really been an incredible thing. And some of our return volunteers are buying vehicles, and many of our folks are in Poland and Romania and driving stuff across the border and getting them into Ukraine where the Ukrainians can use them. So I'm not here to raise funds, but I would just encourage you all to dig as deep as you can. This is probably the once in our lifetime situation where a country was invaded really with totally false pretense, and it's been brutal. And again, I'm not going to get into that, but there are war crimes, and that, you know, that reckoning will take probably 20 or 30 years in the International Criminal Court. I was there for 4 years. I lived near Zolote Varota, the Golden Gate in Kyiv, in a beautiful little neighborhood that had amazing culture and restaurants and people. And it was enlightening to me to learn that my great-grandmother, who we called Baba, which I saw before I came to Ukraine, was Babushka. No, it was Babusia, and she was from Kharkiv, Stanislav. So I learned that I am one grandparent in Ukraine, and then we learned that a grandmother on my father's side was born in Kamenets-Podilsky, and on the charts that we had, it was always Kamenets-Podilsky, Russia. So once I got to Ukraine, I said, oh, I've got great-grandparents on both sides from Ukraine. So I am partly made in Ukraine. And that was a beautiful thing. On Wednesday, we had a benefit. I'm in a band called Love Over Anger Music, and I recorded in Ukraine with Ukrainian musicians who are now displaced and out of their studios. But we put a 4-song EP, they call it, and it's called Made in Ukraine. And of course, the proceeds are going to Ukraine, but the way things go, you get 0.001 cents per stream. So it's not doing very much, but it's the awareness that we're trying to create for all things Ukraine. I want to say that we collaborated with Rotary in Ukraine. We did the first RYLA, which is Rotary Youth Leadership Academy, and it was in Lviv. So we have strong relationships between our local staff that still are with Peace Corps, again, not working, and the Lviv group. And that was a brilliant event in person. And then with COVID, we did it the next 2 years virtually. We also are working with a Rotary group in Cherkasy, and some of our return volunteers are drafting a global grant for several $100,000, and they're selecting several Rotary groups with whom they already have contacts, and the funding will go directly to there. And again, as you know, the funds need to go to a Rotary group in the country to facilitate the process. I know from other chats that I've done with Rotary that there's quite a few questions, so maybe I'll end it here, and if there are any questions, I'll be glad to do the best I can. Again, we have experts who know more than I do here, but I'll do the best I can. Any? Yes, sir. Yeah, gentleman asked where people are going when they leave Kyiv. And thank you for saying Kyiv. I mean, as an Americans, what we knew was Kiev and the dish chicken Kiev, and that's a Russian legacy. So thank you for saying Kyiv. And for those of us who say Ukraine, the Ukraine is again a past construct, and that's important. Language is important to answer your question. Folks were heading west, so it was Lviv and then Lviv. There were bombs even on the Polish side of Lviv, which like 12 miles from the border. People started moving down to Zakarpattian mountain chain, which is in the southwest Bulgaria, Romania area. And many people left the country and went to Turkey, and went to Poland, US, other places in Europe. Yes, Bill.
I was wondering, what is the total displacement of the population at this point?
I believe it's 6 million displaced and 5 million refugees or something. It's up to 12.5 million total. Yeah, and I think it was 43 million. The reason I know that is we're looking at COVID rate. So we're looking at the population. So it was 43 million when I left. Natalia.
Very interesting what you have to say. So what about COVID in Ukraine during the war? Is that even a concern, or is it such a life and death and harrowing situation that for all practical purposes, COVID has ended?
The quick answer is yes. And I just asked one of my staff members yesterday, what's up with COVID? And she said, oh, COVID's long done, even though the virus is still there. But even before the war, nobody was wearing masks. I mean, it was the very independent spirit. People are walking around and doing their own thing. And people weren't interested in getting vaccinated, a very low vaccination rate. So when I was there, I was still wearing my mask when I was running, just to be respectful, because I was a visitor there, but I was the only one for sure. Yes, sir.
Where do you see the end game here with Ukraine? I mean, how does it net out? How does it finalize? How does it finish?
Right. Just hoping for peace. Right. No, hoping for peace as soon as possible, but on the Ukrainian terms. I mean, Crimea was taken in 2014, basically without a shot. Ukraine didn't have a navy to fight against, and they realized better than destruction, they'll give up Crimea temporarily. And that's, that's been going on. And then in Luhansk and Donetsk, there's been active fighting since 2014. So this isn't new, wasn't new to anyone. I inherited a program that was growing, and what we did was we moved to Kharkivska, we moved to Khersonska in the south, we moved to Zaporizhzhia in the east, and we were trying to get further and further towards the conflict line, but out of quote harm's way, when the reality is the missiles can hit France, the nuclear missiles can hit Great Britain, as you see in the news. So we were moving east, and I think what Ukraine would like is to get the territory back. And the question is, will we provide them enough support so they can actually win this war and they can dictate the terms? And that's what I'm hoping for. Again, I think it's about reclaiming Soviet hegemony and just a very, very deranged individual living in his own world. Amen. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your talk. It's very informative. I'm assuming that the Peace Corps has pulled out well before all of the hostilities, but I've been reading in the media that looks like the American embassy is looking to reopen there. And I just wondered if you see in the foreseeable future, would Peace Corps be returning?
Right. Peace Corps volunteers in all of the world left in March 2020 when COVID started. And actually, Ukraine was the third country to evacuate because the country shut down the airport. So we couldn't respond to any medical emergency, not COVID related. So we had to evacuate about 300 people. And that was a exercise in any event. There's the US Embassy, Christina Kyiv, who is the they call her acting ambassador. She's deputy chief of mission, and she's been doing that since Ambassador Yovanovich was basically fired in the last administration. So there hasn't been an ambassador in Ukraine for probably 2.5 years now. But we didn't have any volunteers, but our staff continued to work with local organizations, and they're still engaging every other week. I'm in touch with them, but officially like having staff meetings, and they're still working with partners when they can. Some parts of Ukraine are less stressed than others, although if you're not stressed with the war, you're stressed with IDPs. So Peace Corps is not going to be back with volunteers for quite a while, but I see many opportunities, and I'm hopeful that that would happen soon. I think we're going to maybe end up the last question. Is that right?
Just to give us a better idea of the type of work that Peace Corps volunteers are capable of doing. And you mentioned some of them are seniors, not just younger folks like I was when I went to Chile. So could you just describe some of the ways that volunteers are engaged with the government entities that are their hosts?
Yes, I'm thinking of our more senior volunteers. One of them was teaching at a university in Odessa, which is a very important place strategically and culturally, at a university there, and teaching actually coding and high-level IT issues. We had a woman who turned 74 in a tiny village. I think it was called, I can't pull the name, but she had to, she was working on what similar to your program, rural community development. So she was working with women's groups and youth groups and trying to organize. And we have another gentleman who was working on financial literacy, which we initiated for Peace Corps. We're actually the first post to put that into our program. We've got some great materials in English and Ukrainian. So those are some examples.
Well, Michael, thank you very much. Very good timing on your part, or on our part. All right. And as I said, our hearts go out to the people of Ukraine. We recently raised some money and contributed that through United Help Ukraine. And thank you, Natalie. And I hope you have an opportunity to talk with our guests today. We have a tradition of planting a tree in the honor of each speaker. We in partnership with the National Park Service, and we're on the verge of confirmation of, finally, after 2 years, a tree planting ceremony. Originally, these were replacement cherry blossom trees down at the tidal basin. Now we've added 35 native trees, so I don't know which will be yours, for our downtown parks. So you will get through the mail an original tree certificate, which is our commitment to plant that tree for you. And we'll even be able to tell you where it is.